Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And it's great to be back in Grand Rapids, of course, and see familiar faces and spend some time together. That's great. I want to present to you something today that I have just entered the edge of, this whole realm of printers' marks, places of publication, financing of printing, and so on. It's an entire study, a field of itself. And it seems to me the kind of field that traditionally has required the patience of European scholars who are willing to do critical editions and dedicate a lifetime to projects of that nature. I think one of the reasons why I managed to do what I did here is that once I sink my teeth into something, I can't let go until they meet. And you'll see, you'll get a sense of what that is. And I want to give you one example. There's a dissertation of Christophe Chazalon, the University of Geneva. And for his thesis, he looks at all the printers and their marks between 1579 and 1581. That's it. He measures every printer's mark to the millimeter and creates an entire taxonomy of all the printer's marks, every last detail. So what I want to do today is go beyond the regular dictionaries of pseudonyms and antonyms, go beyond Emile Adokar-Weller's Dictionnaire des ouvrages français portant des fausses indications des lieux d'impression des imprimeurs. That's a very important work from 1864. And what I want to do is give you some of the kitchen work. Sometimes scholars would rather hide their kitchen work. That's sort of their secret. I don't view scholarship that way, and I don't want to. I think it's a collaborative project, and we're here to work on it together. So if I can show you the way I got to where I got, and it helps you somehow, I'm happy. Scholars of 20 years ago would be astonished to think that I could solve the questions that I did between my study, good internet access, a nice big iMac screen, and a library at the University of British Columbia for some bibliographic reference works. Happened to be good for what I needed, and one friend in Geneva who photographed one book for me. And the result was what I'm going to show you. It's a detective story, the likes of what we might find from Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson were going for a camping trip one day, and they sat together in the evening, drank a bottle of wine, and made their beds and laid down to go to sleep for the night. And some hours later, Sherlock Holmes wakes up and he nudges Watson and he says, Dr. Watson, what do you see? And he looks up, he says, I see millions of stars. What does that tell you? Well, he says, astronomically it tells me there are millions of galaxies and perhaps billions of planets. And horologically it tells me that Saturn is in Leo, or astrologically, and horologically it's about 3:15, I think. And theologically, I can see that God is very great and we are but small and insignificant. And meteorologically, it looks like it's going to be a nice day tomorrow. And Holmes was silent for a minute, and he said, Watson, you idiot, someone has stolen our tent. So two hunters are out in the woods, and one of them collapses, and he doesn't seem to be breathing, and his eyes are glazed over. So the other guy whips out his phone. He dials 911 as fast as he can, and he calls emergency services, and he gasps. He says, my friend is dead. What can I do? And the operator says, calm down. Calm down. I can help. First, we have to make sure that he's dead. There's silence for a moment. You hear one gunshot. The guy comes back on the phone. Okay, now what do I do? All right, so let's do a bit of detective work. Here is the only known profile of Antoine de Chandieu. I studied Antoine de Chandieu for my dissertation, and if you look at the picture, I think he has these kind of piercing eyes that are trying to detect something. So he lived from 1534 to 1591, French Reformed theologian, a very important nobleman in of the Third Estate in France, and went to Lausanne, taught in Geneva for a time, was connected to King Henri de Navarre, who became Henry IV, and published important scholastic works. Okay, so that's Antoine de Chandieu. In his scholastic works, he makes liberal use of hypothetical syllogisms. So if it's light, then it's day. Simple hypothetical syllogism. Versus categorical, Socrates is a man, all men are mortals, therefore Socrates is mortal. So he uses a lot of hypothetical syllogisms, and the if statements typically quote a Bible text, or at least paraphrase it, and then he says, if this is the case, then the following must be concluded, and he wants his theological conclusions to be as necessary and as good as the original foundational texts. So I'm working through Antoine de Chandieu, working through his use of hypothetical syllogisms. I'll actually tell you later how many hypothetical syllogisms he uses over against how many categorical in some 6 works of his from the 1580s. And as part of that process, I was trying to find a particular technical phrase, hypotheticum connexum. And that phrase was eluding me. It literally could mean hypothetical link, but he seems to use it as a technical term, and I wanted to know more about the meaning of the term and find others who used it. So I was going through dozens of dialectical and manuals of logic from the Renaissance period up to Chandieu, trying to find out what his source might be. And I wasn't having any great success. I could find lots of sections on hypothetical syllogisms. You could find the word connexus here and there, but you couldn't find the phrase hypotheticum connexum. So what did I do? I decided to do a Google Books text search. And so here's my Google Books advanced book search, and I type in hypotheticum connexum, and the result is this. I did this 2 days ago, 2 books. And one of these did not show up when I was working on this 2 years ago. That's Junius. And that's actually brought me into a new source even for a whole different topic. But 2 hits, and you type it, of course, with the quotations around. So you're looking for a particular exact phrase. On the other hand, if you type connexi hypothetici in the genitive instead of the nominative and reverse the order, you get 7 hits. And the first and second, as well as the 5th, are all Chandieu. And then we have the Hospinian there. We have something from Bucharest, or is it Buchanus? Buchanus. And then we have this, Doctrinae Jesuitarum Praecupia Capita. There's the intriguing one. And I started to go after that one. Now, when you do this in Google Books, it doesn't work to search by lexemes or roots. Like if you wanted to just do hypothet and then do asterisks, it looks for hypothet asterisk. It doesn't look for hypothet and then all sorts of variants. It's not capable of that at this point. When you're working with old printings where the font's not always clear, sometimes it takes 3 letters of the end of one word and combines them with 3 letters at the beginning of another word and comes up with the letters you typed in and thinks it's one word. So you have to sort through a lot of results, but patience is a virtue, and it's worthwhile. Okay, so I go into Doctrinae Jesuiticae, and I'm looking at this page. And I've been reading Chandieu's treatises, remember? And I'm working on my dissertation. And I see this structure, argumentum, number 1, si omnes qui, then you get at qui omnes qui, and then you get ergo scriptor approdatur. That's a hypothetical syllogism. The si, of course, meaning if all who, give, I shouldn't try to translate on the fly, but anyways, the point is that if those who are given the name of Christ by the Holy Spirit ought to read and ought to understand, are they exhorted to read and understand the Scriptures, then they should have it in their own language. Then the atqui says, but this is true, I'm going to prove it. And then the ergo, Scripture should be in their own language. This is what this disputation against the Jesuit Diego Ledesma is about. It's the kind of topic that Chandieu would be interested in, and he definitely did a lot of work against the Jesuits. And he uses an abundance of hypothetical syllogisms. So all of a sudden I'm looking at a hypothetical syllogism set up, printed in the very same way that Chandieu's printers typically did it. And here are the statistics. In 1580, his De Verbo Dei Scripto uses 36 hypothetical and 22 categorical. 1581, De Unico Christi Sacerdotio uses 33 hypothetical and 20 categorical syllogisms. 1582, 35 to 35, it's equal. 1585, there are more categorical on the true human nature of Christ. And 1589, on the spiritual eating of Christ, 16 hypothetical and 8 categorical, and 1589 on the sacramental eating of Christ's body, 25 hypothetical and 15 categorical. So there's definitely a preponderance of hypothetical syllogisms. Now, just because somebody else uses it doesn't necessarily connect them to Chandieu. But here's the bottom corner of the one page we were looking at. This is identical phraseology to what I was reading in Chandieu. The explanation, the execution of the argument, or the treatment of the argument, it says, it is indeed a hypothetical syllogism kata poia theta. That goes all the way back to Aristotle, according to kind or quality, and you use those for a fortiori arguments where you say from the lesser to the greater. They work really good when you're going from Old Testament to New Testament. If it's the case in the Old, how much more in the New? By which kind of syllogism, he says, and indeed all syllogisms, theologians are accustomed to use these just as much as the didactikois, the didactic or categorical arguments. And in this mode, the hypotheses are not probable but truly analytical, appealing to the distinction between the topics and the analytics in Aristotle's works. And they also, these hypotheticals, are brought forth from the treasure, the most pure treasure of the prophets and apostles. So he's saying the prophets and apostles use these kinds of hypothetical syllogisms. And then he goes, hypothetici autum connexi veritas per se lucet, which is to say the hypothetical link or argument is self-evident. It has light of itself, per se lucet. Now, these were exactly the same phrases as I was finding in Chandieu. So what do I want to do? I want to find out who wrote this. One of his students? I don't know. So here's the title page of the entire volume. Doctrinae Jesuiticae Praecapua Capita Thomas Quintus. So this is 5th volume of some anti-Jesuit treatises, published in Rupelai, which is the Latin for La Rochelle, and Theophilum Regium is identified as the printer, 1586, for this particular volume. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. I have no idea who that printer is. And there's this nice fleuron on the title page. And now that I know a bit more about printer's marks, this is not a typical printer's mark, certainly not for the ones around Geneva who have more elaborate pictures cut into their printer's marks. So then I go inside, and here's the index, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 treatises inside, and we were looking at the one with Diego Ledesma or Jacobo Ledesma, number 5. It says there's a thq.t, and here's a thq.v, and here's a thq.t. Perhaps those are identifying the author, perhaps they're not. I still don't even know for sure. Here's the title page itself of work number 5, page 259. And when I got here and I saw that headpiece, I said, I have seen that before. Where is that from? And since I've been studying Chandieu, the likelihood is that I probably saw it in Chandieu's works somewhere. And indeed, I recognized it as one used by Jean Lepreux in one of the works of Chandieu. So, then there are these other things that I already mentioned, the appeal to the analytical method, the execution of the argument, the hypotheticum connexum, and we also get this. This is written to or against Jacob Diego Ledesma, a monk of the New Society, which, not without blasphemy, is named the Society of Jesus. Chandieu happens to title known treatises of his own exactly like that these monks blasphemously dare to take the name of Jesus for their order. So, I'm getting excited by this time, right? Thinking I have maybe discovered some works of Chandieu. I'm having heart palpitations because no one has ever said that these works were in his bibliography. He didn't. So, time to do some detective work. All right. So what do? We go to the standard bibliographic reference works to find out more about the printer. And I'm going to just note here a number of them: H.M. Adams' the Catalogue of Books, and the British Library short title catalog, and then a supplement to it, and David Shaw, Cathedral Libraries catalog, and Louis de Grave, Répertoire bibliographique des livres imprimés en France au XVIe siècle. I have the full bibliographic information for each of those in the off-prints of the article, and I have some with me, so if you want to take an off-print later, you can get the full bibliographic information. This is the most important one. Note volume 51. This is an enormous selection that only a certain number of libraries in the world actually have the entire selection of these works, and thankfully the University of British Columbia did. And you, of course, as you get a little bit excited that maybe you've discovered something that other scholars hadn't, you also develop this fear that somebody already before you found out what was going on here, and somebody's got the answers about who Theophilum Regium is and so on. And so you need to be exhaustive, and you need to search and dig to make sure that you're not just reproducing some other scholar's findings or challenging something out there that you don't even realize exists. So you got to dig. So here's the work of Louis de Grave, and he categorizes all of the printed books in France in the 16th century by place. So this volume, 51 of that series, and 16th in the sub-series, place number 127, La Rochelle. And here we go. He's got what I want. Théophile le Roi in French, or Regius in Latin. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 works noted. Doctrinae Jesuitarum Praecupua Capita. So there it is. And he's got all the details of how many pages and where you can find more information about them. All right? You could say, well, we can stop our search there. But of course, after all, this is a definitive work. There was a printer in La Rochelle named Theophilum Regium. Done. Carry on. But I had seen too many things that were alerting me to there's something going on here. I saw this headband in Jean Lepreux's work, which is published either in Morges or which is close to Lausanne, or in Geneva. So there's something going on here. So you look up some more literature, and here we have a 1978 article by the same author, Louis de Grave, leading scholar on French printers. And he has some notes on printing in La Rochelle itself at the end of the 16th and beginning of the 17th century. Perfect, exact period I'm thinking of, 1580s. And here we go. He's got list of works printed in La Rochelle. First one, Martin Chemnitz, and it's Chemnitz because that's the author of the first treatise inside the collected volume, Doctrinae Jesuitarum. And there's another one, Martin Chemnitz, and flip the page, and here it is. That's the one published in 1584. And here we have Jean de Lépine, a French work published by the same publisher, and then a 1989 reprint of the Doctrinae Jesuitarum with the final information up there. All right, so now we've got another authoritative source by a scholar who knows his stuff, who has investigated the matter fairly deeply. But of course, I'm still concerned that maybe somebody found something out about this. So I go to a work I mentioned earlier, Emil Ottokar Weller, 1864. 1588, he's got Excellent Discours de Jean de Lépine regarding the contentment and rest of the spirit, à la Rochelle par Théophile Regius. And what does Ottokar or Weller say? Basel. He's telling us, and this is his work on fictitious printers and false places of printing, he's saying this work was actually printed in Basel. So now we have one hint from a bibliophile in the 19th century that maybe Theophilum Regium was actually in Basel. Now that only complicates matters because now it throws Basel into the mix, where I was looking more around Geneva, Lausanne, and the Lepreux brothers, who I was onto, and I was doing research on them, they had never published anything in Basel. And then I also had never seen this printing of this work by Jean de Lépine, and Weller did not hint at any problem with the place of publication in any of the other works of Regium. So, what was the direction I had to take? Do a little bit more detective work. This is the reference to what you just saw. And so I had to begin my own investigation, starting with the printer's marks that I recognized. And I began using the Post-Reformation Digital Library, Google Books, Staatsbibliothek Berlin, ERARA, GLN 1516, which is a site wherein Jean-François Gilmont catalogs exhaustively not just all the printers and books of the 15th, 16th century in the Swiss areas, but even every location of every book that still exists from that time. This is exhaustive. Okay? And what would I do? I would start using thumbnail views to zero in on pertinent pages. And a lot of patience needed to go through it and create, finally, a chart of printer's marks with authors, titles, dates, page occurrences of each mark. I'll show you some of my work in a moment. First, I want to just look at the advanced search options. Look what you can do on the Post-Reformation Digital Library. I suspect most of you are familiar with this. Shout out to David Seitzma. You can restrict your search to publishers. You can restrict your search to dates and places, whatever you want. This is really powerful. This also underlines the need for help with editing in PRDL so that we can get as much information into the database about each work as we can, and then when we do searches like this, it's more comprehensive. So grants are needed, don't you think? All right. Then let's have a look at ERARA's advanced search window. You can search it, and you can change any field to title, author, printer, publisher, date, and place. With the Jean-François Gilmont's work in GLN 1516, again, you can do all kinds of searches. This is the simple search. Here's the advanced search that Jean-François Gilmont has created on his site. And you can even search by typographical mark. So you could type into here fleur or fleuron for flower, or you could type arbre for tree, because some of the printer's marks feature a tree. Or perhaps you could do violier, which is a sailboat, for Prudhomme and Violier, who were printers at the time. That one doesn't work yet, but the other ones work. I was just trying it out today. All right. And the next thing I want to show you, I put into my slides on Wednesday night. And my wife just happened to walk into the study at that moment and look at my iMac screen. And she said, "So you're back to this?" In other words, a couple of years ago, she would walk in my study. "Oh, are your eyes going buggy yet? Because I'm just continuously looking at thumbnail views of books." Now, notice what you can do here. This is a thumbnail view in eRara, which comes through with really nice pictures. You can use Control plus or Control minus on your laptop, on your computer, to just take what's here and increase the size until you can maybe just discern what's the printer's mark. That's Jean Lepreux's printer's mark. This is the Opera Theologica of Antoine de Chandieu. And then there are these tail pieces, and there's these headbands, and there are ornate letters like this. And by using a thumbnail view, you can, in a moment, see which pages have printer's marks that you want to look at. And then you just click on that page, have a look, quickly go back, click on the next page. And if it's the printer's mark you're looking for, you put it into your file and note the occurrence. Okay. Here's Google Books thumbnail view of a 1588 work by Chandieu on the true human nature of Christ over against Lutherans and Roman Catholics in connection with Lord's Supper polemics. Okay. Now, I looked at pages like this for days. I don't know how long I did this, probably a few weeks or something. And at a certain point you say, okay, I can draw my conclusions. I have enough data to make non-falsifiable conclusions. And then you think, oh yeah, but what about this or that? And then I didn't search that particular year yet or that particular publisher or place. And you go back, and there you go for another few hours till wee hours of the morning, making your eyes go buggy, looking at thumbnail views and clicking on pages to see what the printer's marks are on those pages. And you want to make sure that ultimately your findings can stand the scrutiny of other scholars. I don't know how long I did this, but I did a lot of this. And the next slides then are going to show some of the results of the work. All right, so at the top I had just noted for myself sometimes when the Genevan printers collaborated. Jacob Stewart and Eustache Vignon worked together in 1585, Lepreux and Antoine Chupin in 1577, or Jean Lepreux and Antoine Chupin in 1587. I'm sure they worked together on more volumes, but these are particular volumes that identified as printers working together to put out these volumes. So they did cooperate from time to time. Now we have the fleuron, the flower carving, of the title page of the 1580 Doctrinae Jesuitarum. And so here I have listed author, title, publisher, place La Rochelle, date 1580, placement, title page. I found it back in one other place, a work by Chandieu against a Jesuit and published by Jean Lepreux in Morges, 1583, and I noted where it was. And then we have this headband, which was unique to the 1580 volume of Doctrinae Jesuitarum, and I found it in Antoine Chupin. It was a little bit different, but it was very close. And you see that Chupin has used it in about 6 places. And this one is from the Doctrinae Jesuitarum. This one's from Antoine Chupin. Okay. And just want to make a few remarks here about, well, what I would do here is get the work up on my screen, take a screenshot of it, goes on my desktop, drag it onto my Word file. So these are files from Microsoft Word. And then you just create the chart underneath to record where they were. So what I did was first record all the printer's marks of Theophilum Regium and put them into my file, and then I would create these charts underneath. Something to reflect on is that, first of all, you need to find simultaneous or prior occurrences of the marks. Later occurrences might not be relevant because the printer could have sold his typeface or sold his printer's marks to another printer, particularly if they're just the flowers and things like that, and not his actual identifying mark that he would typically put on the title page. Oops, sorry. Just wanted to make another remark about something here. I wanted to say something about the woodcutters who created these ornate printer's marks. most of these would be carved from wood, and you carve away the pieces that aren't going to touch the page. Then you take a roller, roll the ink on it, put it on the page, and you get the printer's mark. These carvers were very artistic, obviously, so that they could carve and, I guess, basically carve backwards so that when you put it on the page, it turns out the way you want it to look. And there are some famous woodcutters, and it may well be that the Genevan printers used the services of the same woodcutter. I suspect Jean-François Gilmont might even know who that is. I don't. Because different printers have similar mythological figures and styles of woodcuts and so on. And you've probably heard of Hans Holbein, because he was a famous artist. He served in the courts of Henry VIII under the patronage of Anne Boleyn and Thomas Cromwell. He was also in Basel for a time, and he also developed his and refined the work of making woodcuts as well as metal cuts for printers. Albrecht Dürer had connection to Luther, and then especially Lucas Cranach, the elder, died in 1553, and then his son, the younger, very close ties to Wittenberg and very important for the spread of Reformation ideas through prints. Often characterizing the Roman Catholic bishops as disorderly and chaotic, and then the Reformed with God breathing his Spirit upon them and such things, or the Lutherans. All right. Here's a rather ornate headpiece from 1580, and the only other place I ever found this was Antoine Chupin, and that's after a lot of looking, because I thought it must occur somewhere else, but 2 years prior, Antoine Chupin. And this became very important for me in identifying the 1580 volume as being printed by Antoine Chupin, and not Theophilum Regium. And then here too, notice we've got Chupin, 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 and two by Lepreux. But the Lepreux ones are a fair bit later. The Chupin are a little bit later. But this one from Chupin is earlier. So I concluded that the likelihood is that Antoine Chupin was the printer of that volume. Now we can move to the volumes 1 to 6, which were Volume 1 gets republished in 1584. It's doubled in size by including 6 treatises rather than just 3. And all of these are collected volumes of previously written anti-Jesuit treatises, whether by Lutherans or Reformed. And they're collecting them all together, 6 volumes of these. A little bit later in Zurich, Rudolf Wirth Hospinian catalogs the entire series of debates from 1517 to 1602 on the Lord's Supper over against the Roman Catholic Church. And that's a new work I just recently discovered, and I need to go through it in detail to see whether he says something about these works published by Theophilum Regium. But here we start seeing Eustache Vignon, his name appearing. But this flower is used by other printers as well, though mostly by Vignon. Then we have this nice image that I sent to Jordan to advertise our meeting today. This is an angel with some snakes. And here you had to look very carefully, because I found a number of occurrences of this, but in some cases the angel has his head turned to its right. In other cases, the head is turned to its left. So there's 2 different carvings of this image. So you had to distinguish which was which. Then we have a very small fleuron, and you would say, well, that's just at the sort of the end of a treatise or the corner of a page, not a very important thing, and it's not very fancy, it's very small, but in fact, because of that, it becomes that much more important for identifying the printer of the work, because not many people are interested in sharing a little printer's mark like that. And this is exclusively used by Eustache Vignon. And when I say with Crespin's mark, Crespin was his father-in-law, who was Jean Crespin, like the Histoire des Martyrs, published in Geneva. Then he passed on his business to his son-in-law, Eustache Vignon, and then he inherits his typeface and he inherits his printer's mark. So this becomes very important in identifying these 6 volumes as actually being printed by Eustache Vignon. And now let's just admire the imagination of the artist a little bit. Here we have a headpiece. I tried to describe it. I said 2 old man winters. So the far ends, you have this sort of old man winter blowing cold winter air out of his mouth or something. And then you've got angels behind him kind of sitting on some ribbon. And then 2 men on the inside with another interesting face in the middle. Just very imaginative woodcuts. Here we have, looks to me kind of like a goblet in the middle with vines going out on each side. And here we have some dragons facing inward here with long tails that become vines. Very mythological figures here. And for one more, a vine with a couple of birds on each end facing, the birds are looking behind them, and the vines are intertwined and kind of like a cornucopia here. Just very imaginative. Let's have a few more. 2 rabbits or goats or something close to the center with snail tails affixed to them and then other flowers coming out behind. And now I want you to note carefully, this tailpiece, I've got it, these are exactly the same in different works, and I use these also to establish that Eustache Vignon was the printer of the 6-volume series between 1584 and 1588. But look at this. At first glance, they're the same, but as you look closely, they're not. I'm not going to try to point out all the differences, but these 2 are from Leipzig, very similar, but they're not the same as those. And here we have a very small ornament, and again, the only occurrence is Eustache Vignon. Never found it anywhere else. So you see, we're coming to the point where we can make conclusions that the volumes 1 to 6 printed over that 4-year period are actually coming out of the print shop of Eustache Vignon, son-in-law of Jean Crespin. Now we come to the 3rd printing of Volume 1. In 1589, it seems as though it was going to be reprinted. It must have been enough copies were purchased that they would print it again. And here's a headpiece. I remember searching for this for a long time because there are a lot of headpieces similar but not the same, and my results on this were ambiguous. I had Vignon with Jacob Stuart in one work in 1585, and then I had Jacob Stuart in 1580, but I'm looking at 1589. It's a little bit before. There's not enough to conclude on the basis of that, but we're going a bit in the direction of perhaps Jacob Stuart. And so then we had 2 flying birds, swirls, a hairy head in the center, and Stuart comes up twice. Can't find it anywhere else. This one I found very intriguing. I'm not sure whether that could actually be a metal cut because it's so sort of shiny. It made me think of a gun barrel sometimes. Looks like an automobile. All right. Yeah. Well, we've got these mice escaping from the ends and this kind of ornamental steel with a head in the middle. But all by Jacob Stuart in the early 1580s. And notice, Dano's Géographiae Joubert des Innocents, we've got the same, we've got these occurring in the same work, which is also important. So, we're going to be detectives and we're going to ask who's guilty. Volume 1, this is from 1580, and Antoine Chupin, a Genevan printer who had his own typeface, but not his own shop. So we can learn on an online register of printers from the Swiss areas in the 16th century. And perhaps with his editor helping him, he chose La Rochelle as place of publication. Here's the interesting thing. It turns out, and this confirmed my findings, that Antoine Chupin published the first Protestant side account of the voyage to Brazil under Villegagnon and the slaughter of the Huguenots that happened in the Guanabara Bay, where the Guanabara Confession was written. Jean de Leiry writes an account later to counter the Roman Catholic accounts of the events. And Antoine Chupin is the printer. But he chooses, 1578, just 2 years before this, he chooses to say that it's printed in La Rochelle. The probable reason would be that a good Frenchman would buy a book from La Rochelle much more quickly than he would buy a book from Geneva. After all, the French monarchy had been concerned from time to time about the influence of Geneva, missionaries from Geneva coming into France, infiltrating France. And so if you say it's printed in La Rochelle, you have a likely that you're going to sell more copies. And in fact, it was a runaway bestseller for Antoine Chupin. He made a lot of money on that book. And it's still a fabulous book that anthropologists study today because Jean de Leiry made one of the earliest sort of anthropological studies of the sounds that the natives made in Brazil, the kind of work they did, what they ate, all sorts of details. There's more you can say about Jean de Leiry. He's such an interesting fellow. Because he had learned how to live off the land and live with almost nothing when he fled from Villegagnon and was with the natives in Brazil. Later on, at the siege of Sankara, where he's the pastor in the city, he taught the people how to eat the soles of their shoes to quell their hunger pains and stay alive. This is during the French Wars of Religion. So fascinating. So it seems that we can explain, possibly, the choice of Rupelai or La Rochelle, perhaps because Chupin had a runaway bestseller that he said was published in La Rochelle, so he thought, I'll try it again. That's possible. There may be other reasons. And if that's the case, would that be the reason why other printers continued to use La Rochelle? Because we now know that 3 different printers picked up these volumes and printed them. It could also have to do with whether the Genevan authorities were willing to give permission to do these reprints of other published volumes, whether they wanted this much of a controversial type publication. I don't know. I just don't know. And I don't have at this point access to the Archives d'État in Geneva, the archives, to look at all of the publications for printing and all the requests. But let's go on to the next one, because we can say something about the request for printing for the volumes that were done 1584 to 1588. So who's guilty here in these 6 volumes? Eustache Vignon, son-in-law of Jean Crespin, who inherited the business, including typeface and ornaments. Here's an interesting piece. Vignon received permission in 1584 from Geneva's city council to print a work by Jean de Serres. And Jean de Serres is in Nîmes, and he is carrying on disputation with the local Jesuits who've taken over a school in the area, and he takes them to task. And the debate becomes increasingly scholastic over the time it occurs, and there are about 4 different exchanges. And the 4th work in Volume 1, so remember Volume 1 in 1580 had 3 works, now it has 6. The 4th work is one of these pieces by Jean de Serres over against the Jesuits in Nîmes. And this is the first known publication of this work by Jean de Serres. We have no record of it being published prior to this anywhere else. And we have a request of Eustache Vignon to the Geneva City Council, may I print a work and sell a work of Jean de Serres? Therefore, the likely conclusion is that he was asking permission to print the work that ended up in here. That seemed to verify Eustache Vignon as the likely printer for the 6-volume set, if the evidence from the printer's marks was not yet sufficient. All right, and then Volume 1 is reprinted in 1589. Jacob Stewart, another Genevan printer. But still, look at the mark here. You can find this mark with multiple printers. It's nothing special. This is not Jacob Stewart's regular printer's mark. Here's his regular printer's mark. There's a tree being watered. You've got the tetragrammaton up in the cloud, and a man bearing a load, planting another tree, perhaps something to do with sowing the seed of the gospel. I'm not sure. But that's his regular printer's mark. But this doesn't have his regular printer's mark. It's just got a kind of generic mark. All right? Now we've got one more volume that I didn't talk about yet. Let's look at it. This is Excellent Discours de l'Épine Angevin. So Jean de l'Épine, the monk who became Reformed, thought it was after the colloquium of Poissy in 1561. And it says it's printed at La Rochelle par Théophile Regius. So this is a French work. It's the only French work purportedly printed by Theophilum Regium. And there's the title. But look, the regular printer's mark is missing. It's just a flowery, generic kind of mark, which I am not even sure I've found anywhere else. I don't remember. But as soon as you turn the page, all the marks inside and the printing are virtually exactly the same as a printing of the same work in the same year by Prudhomme and Violier of Geneva. So now we've got a fourth printer doing this and saying La Rochelle, but look here, here's the other printing. Excellent Discours de l'Épine Angevine. But here's the printer's mark of Violier. Violier meaning sailboat, and look at that, there's a sailboat being towed by a fish. You can't see that. Prudhomme, what does that mean? A valiant man or something. And so these two men are printing together, but here's where Weller must have got his idea of Basel, because the same year, same book, but different printer's mark identifying it as printed in Basel without any name of the printer. Okay? So the printer's mark occurs on this one but doesn't occur on the other one of the same year, and it's basically almost the same printing. The likely explanation is that Prudhomme and Violier financed this edition but didn't finance the other edition. And a printer's mark indicates who's carrying the load, the cost of printing, and therefore can legitimately sell it and recoup their losses and so on, rather than just charging some nobleman so many livres for printing the work or something like that. All right, so Basel as place is false, and likely this is the source of Weller's mistaken attribution of Regium's publication, sorry, not shins, but that one publication that he said should be Basel. So remember we saw this earlier. He says Basel. But now we've reached the requisite level of detail that we can say, no, not Basel. This one is in Geneva. All the printings of Theophilum Regium are printed in Geneva by Antoine Chupin, the first volume in 1580, by Eustache Vignon, 1584 to 88, the 6 volumes, then by Jacob Stuer, the 1589 reprint, and this one by, this was Prudhomme and Violier. Okay. So let's draw a few conclusions. First of all, when you're doing something like this, you must find printer's marks that are used prior to or at the same time as the publication under study, since the printer may have shared or sold his letters and woodcuts after said publication went to press. I'll just ignore that last piece there. Well, online collections of printer's marks, I'll show you something about that in a moment. You need full familiarity with existing literature because you don't want to venture forth some hypothesis which some scholar in the 19th century already dealt with, and you're wrong. And if he got part of the conclusion but not everything, you've got to interact with that and show that. Consulting experts is encouraged at the right stage. Collaboration is important in our era. I said that I'm presenting to you my kitchen work. First, when I think of doing that, I think that's sort of my scholarly secret, but really, somebody has to do something like this. It's just hard work, and it takes some time, and it takes a lot of patience, and a lot of people can do this because of the resources we have now, and I think we need to be stewardly with our resources and share knowledge with each other. And then consulting experts is encouraged. At a certain point, I thought, okay, I know that Jean-François Gilmont is world expert on this sort of literature. I know that Francis Hegman has published a lot on the book, French Reform, or French books, French evangelical books in this era. But let me try and contact Jean-François Gilmont. And so I explain my situation. I send him a copy of my work up to that point, and I get a response. And of course, I'm delighted. Just a young scholar getting a response from him. And he was very helpful. And he helped me with the th.q.t as well, which I mentioned earlier. What does a printer's mark mean? At least in this era, I'm only going to restrict my conclusions to the 1580s in Geneva. It seems to indicate who finances the edition. And if their mark is there, they probably got permission from Geneva City Council to execute the printing and sell it in the city. We should distinguish, when we think of a printing, think of the printer, who actually has the typeface and does the work, but then the workshop is another thing. Antoine Chupin had his own typeface, but not his own workshop, so he's maybe in somebody else's workshop in the back corner, trying to eke out a living. Then there are editors. In this case, we've got 6 volumes of anti-Jesuit treatises. Somebody gathered these together. Almost undoubtedly some theologian who, has access to a lot of these works, has money to buy them, and can gather them all together and give them to the printer and say, okay, here are the 6 volumes, typeset this all and put it in one. And so the editor could very well be distinct from the printer. And then there are the booksellers and the patrons who will sometimes finance editions. So we still have questions about who financed these editions. What's Theophilum Regium supposed to represent? In the prefaces of each work, which are unique to each of the 6 volumes, we get a reference to Noster Theophilus at some point, our Theophilus, which is probably tongue-in-cheek a reference of the editor to himself as he writes the preface, trying to make it sound like Theophilus is the printer. And he'll talk about our printing shop or something like that. Okay. And the reasons for anonymity may be various. I identified one reason, which maybe it will help you sell books. Another reason, maybe you didn't get permission to print. In France, that would be permission from the king. In Geneva, it's permission from city council. And this is an era of censorship. Everything is censored. That's just normal. Okay. And I just wanted to show you, I've put some key resources on printers' marks. We created this in Post-Reformation Digital Library, and you can go in there, and Christophe Chazalon, whose thesis I mentioned earlier, is the first one. And then there's different ways of searching for printers' marks. And by no means is there out there any exhaustive catalog of printers' marks. Certainly not. But these will help. One of the things I tried was to upload images into Google Images and see whether it would find similar images. For printers' marks, I would say Google doesn't have enough printers' marks uploaded to help you find similar marks. So I didn't have much success that way. And so, as we come to the end, here's proof that the standard bibliographic reference works have adopted my findings. This is Jean-François Gilmont's GLN 1516. He says, the notice is complete. Doctrinae Jesuitarum praepua capita Geneva, La Rochelle. Eustache Vignon is the printer, not Théophile Leroy. So he has agreed, and I'm humbled by this. So, indeed, there it is. That's it. Any questions?
Yes, so we have questions.
Have you asked the question, the further question, which is not even the subject you're dealing with here, but what printers are trying to say with the marks that they have? Some of them are quite interesting, unique. I mean, one that that I'm quite fond of is a Jean Crespin one, where there's an anchor in the heavens, arms coming out from the clouds, and it says JC on either side. And you could think it was Jesus Christ, but it's probably Jean Crespin, and it's also a book by Jean Calvin. And there's a little bit of humor there, but he's also trying to say something. And then there's Stephanus with his olive tree. There seems a lot to be done with what these marks actually mean to the printer.
Yeah, that would be a very interesting study in and of itself, and it would take someone with some knowledge of Greek and Roman mythology, because there's definitely stuff coming back from there. And I'm quite sure the anchor with the clouds and the outstretched arms has antecedents that I've noticed somewhere in a late medieval manuscript. I know I looked at that somewhat, and I tried to understand what's he saying by this. The anchor, like Hebrews 6, verse 19, an anchor for our soul that reaches into the heavens, and we have to hold on to the anchor. But that the arms come out of the clouds seems to say something about the ephemeral existence of humanity. Sort of, yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot there. Prudhomme and Violier there's like a whale with a rope in its mouth, and it's swimming along and towing this sailboat. And now Violier means a sailboat. Prudhomme means a valiant man. I'm not sure where the valiant man is in there. Then Jacob Stewart, we saw the tree. The one man is planting it. The other man is watering the tree. Probably images of the sower and the seed and planting, watering, growing. God gives the growth. Something to do with the gospel. And then in the clouds, the tetragrammaton, which comes through even in the Stuttenvertaling. Early versions of it. They took the tetragrammaton out, I think, after the first edition or something. Wasn't good. It's the second commandment.
Thanks very much, Ted. I really enjoyed the presentation and learned a lot. I have a question, and it's about the fictitious, you discussed the fictitious names and places. Now, I was wondering, how about fictitious dates? Are the dates generally reliable, and how would you confirm that?
Yeah, definitely in some cases, printings are backdated to throw off the censors, particularly the Sorbonne, right, and the Index Prohibitorum Librorum, which the Sorbonne already de facto has an existence before the Council of Trent, which establishes the index, I think. But in this case, all of the treatises contained in the 6 volumes predate 1580, and yet reach close to it as late as, I believe, 1578 for one of the treatises. So it supports the dating. I have no reason to believe that the dating is incorrect. It also fits the fact that 1580 is volume 1, 3 treatises. The second edition with the 6 treatises is 4 years later. And then treatises, or volumes 1 through 6, follow chronologically, 1584, 85, 86, another one in 86 and 88. Anyway, it all fits, it all works. And then the printing by Jacob Stewart in 1589 seems to be the beginning of an attempt to reprint the series, but it stalls at 1 as far as we can tell, 1 volume. So I have no reason to believe the dates are wrong in this case. They fit. I have an article that's 75% complete on a detailed study of all the treatises within the 6 volumes to show who wrote them, when, where, and so on. And it looks to me like perhaps Jean-François Gilmont is waiting for me to finish that, because his GLN 1516 doesn't include all that information yet. He knows I'm working on it. I shared some of it with him some time ago. But this is in the middle of dissertation writing, so it stalled my dissertation writing for a while. And it's very appropriate to have finished the dissertation and now go back to the contents, because I'm still faced with the question, who's the author of those treatises within the 6 volumes which are anonymous or are hiding the author, at least behind ambiguous acronyms like th.q.t and .v. Who is that?
So you're not done yet. You haven't established that's Shandia for that treatise?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know for sure who it is. I don't quite have the smoking gun, but it's close. It would be exciting to publish that you've discovered the works of a major figure that for the last 4 centuries nobody knew he actually wrote them. But then you have to be so careful. What if one of his students is trying to imitate him and go very close to what he does? Could be.
It strikes me, establishing dating to, you need corroborating or circumstantial evidence like the request to the city council to publish something, and then you actually see it dated maybe in the same year or whatever.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things help. Are there other sorts of evidences that you could imagine, like if you could find things that would help? I'm thinking specifically, I think it was the Steuer slide where you had the marks next to each other, and it struck me that the font was different. Is there any significance that you can gain from comparing, conceivably, that you could gain from comparing the fonts between different printings and so on, or are those separate from the printer's mark and workshop specific, or what
Okay.
significance might there be there?
In this period, many of the printers in Geneva use a similar format and a similar typeface for the particular letters, but they will have unique ornate letters. Initial letter Q, initial letter O, P, whatever. And you can make comparisons of those, and in a few cases, using those was, in the end, I don't remember if it was the Steuer case or another one, but in the end, those became almost the decisive determining factor for who the printer was, that we could find identical initial ornate letters.
One of the things that was striking when I was at the Planten Press in Antwerp was the fact that the foundry that was present at the press itself. And if you can picture a shop room floor where there's these almost rows of desks like this where they're laying out the printing for the lines of type. And the reason they needed the foundry upstairs is because they're using anywhere from 12 to 15-year-old, 18-year-old kids to lay out some of these types as of under apprentices and these sorts of things. And it's not uncommon for them to lose typefaces on the floor, for them to get damaged or stepped on or something like that. So they're literally running upstairs, recasting, reforging these little tiny pieces and putting them back in the shop and going back downstairs. I mean, it's so the fact of the smaller letters, and you'll see this sometimes whenever you have, when you see in a book and you notice, wait a minute, that's not a U, that's an N. They just flipped it upside down. That indicates the laziness of the apprentice to go get the new one because he's out.
Right. Okay.
So you'll see some of those sorts of things. So all that to say is that it would be very difficult to peg down a specific typeface because odds are there's someone on premise site that's recasting these, as needed.
Right. But as you become familiar enough with a variety of works, you can say, oh, this is definitely the typeface that's common in a certain place. Like Leipzig could be very distinct from Antwerp and from Geneva, and so on. This whole field of studying printers' marks is a subfield of the study of printers, and the study of printers generally is very robust, and to the point that someone like Andrew Pettigrew and the French Vernacular Book Project, they don't just say there were these printers operating at this time in these cities, but they had X number of presses, and they executed X number of volumes, and that totals X number of pages because there were X number of editions and X number of copies of each volume, etc. So they're to the point of saying how many pages a particular printer produced. Yeah.
Well, join me in thanking Ted for this fine presentation. Thank you. And there are offerings.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, if you want the bibliographic information, go ahead. Relieve me of some of these. I don't need them.